Welcome to Law of One Wisdom. Today we're diving into session 5. And imagine for a moment finding out that every persistent physical ailment you have, like a mysteriously tight shoulder or a recurring stomach ache, is literally just your body keeping score of a philosophical argument you're having with yourself.
It is a wild thought, isn't it? But today, we're looking at a profound text that suggests exactly that. We're examining a very specific window in time, January 23rd, 1981.
Right, the setup with Don Elkins asking the questions, Jim McCarty serving as the scribe, and Carla Rueckert acting as the instrument.
Exactly. She is channeling a voice that identifies itself as Ra. And what we're going to explore in this deep dive is Ra's deeply radical framework for what it genuinely means to be a healer.
Yeah, the rigorous mental disciplines required to access a higher state of consciousness, and this incredible concept that the physical body is merely a creature of the mind. But hold on, before we get too deep into the application of all this, I do have to stop and ask for some definitions.
Sure, yeah, lay them out.
We are talking about Ra, who is described in the text as a sixth-density social memory complex. For someone approaching this material for the first time, what does that actually mean? I mean, are we talking about a hive mind?
It's a dense piece of terminology, I know, but it helps to view it as an evolutionary stage of consciousness. Ra describes a social memory complex not as a collective losing their individuality, but rather as a civilization that has evolved past the heavy physical density we currently inhabit.
Okay, so it's not a loss of self.
Right. They have reached a point, the sixth density, where the thoughts, memories, and experiences of every individual are just naturally available to the whole. There's no veil of misunderstanding between them. They are communicating from a state of unified wisdom.
Okay, that helps set the stage. And the other term that comes up constantly in this session is intelligent infinity.
Yes, that is a big one.
When Ra talks about a healer contacting intelligent infinity, are they just using a different word for God, or is this like a literal energy field?
Well, Ra uses intelligent infinity to describe the ultimate boundless source energy of the universe. It is the fundamental, unmanifested fabric of all creation.
So it's raw potential.
Exactly. It is infinite potential, and the intelligence comes from its inherent drive to experience itself. So when Ra speaks of contacting it, they are talking about tapping into the raw, undifferentiated power that sustains existence.
Which brings us right to the core of Don Elkins' very first question in the session. Don brings up an assumption about how healing works. He suggests to Ra that a healer must first purify themselves through intense discipline.
Yeah, he really leans into that idea.
He does. And then by setting an example, they create a mental configuration in the patient that allows the patient to heal. It sounds perfectly logical. I mean, we love the narrative of the enlightened guru leading by perfect example.
We do crave that narrative.
Yeah.
We really want the wounded healer who achieves perfection and just pulls the rest of us up the mountain.
Right, exactly.
But Ra gently dismantles this assumption entirely. Ra states, and I quote, "It is not by example that the healer does the working. The working exists in and of itself." The healer is absolutely not setting an example. Instead, Ra clarifies that the healer is merely a catalyst.
Okay, let's unpack this word catalyst, because that changes the entire dynamic of what a healing interaction is. When we normally think of a healer, we picture, a mechanic.
The mechanic, correct?
Yeah, you take your broken car to the mechanic, and the mechanic gets under the hood, expends their own physical energy, turns the wrenches, and actively rebuilds the engine. But Ra is describing something completely passive.
Completely passive.
It makes me think the healer isn't the mechanic at all. The healer is just a set of jumper cables.
What's fascinating here is that the jumper cable analogy is incredibly apt. The cables themselves possess no intrinsic power to start a car.
Right, they're just wire.
Exactly. They don't generate electricity, and they don't force the engine to turn over. The power, the intelligent infinity, does the actual work. The cables simply provide the conduit for energy to flow from an infinite source to a depleted battery.
Right. And if you think about the physics of a jumper cable, what happens if the wire is too thin or full of gunk? It creates resistance.
Yes, it heats up.
Right. When massive voltage hits resistance, the cable heats up and it can melt. Ra says the healer takes no thought for the working. It seems like the ego, the desire to be the hero, to take credit for the healing, is the resistance that melts the cable.
Removing the ego is the philosophical relief embedded in this concept. If you are the jumper cable, the healing is not about your personal charisma.
Which is such a relief.
It really is. It is not about your virtue, your intense effort, or your ability to perform a savior role for the patient. Your only job, your absolute responsibility, is to be a clean, unresisting conduit. The pressure to fix someone evaporates, replaced by the quiet, disciplined responsibility of remaining clear.
But if our only job is to be a clear channel, how do we actually clean the gunk out of the wire?
That is the big question.
Dawn asks for the very first step in becoming an effective healer, and Ra introduces the first of what they call the 3 teachings or learnings. And it starts entirely in the mind.
Ra states that the prerequisite of mental work is the ability to retain silence of self at a steady state. They offer this striking imagery. The mind must be opened like a door. The key is silence.
Which sounds lovely in a meditation retreat, but my mind is rarely silent.
Oh, none of ours are.
Right. So to even begin mastering this, Ra tells us we must internalize the polarity of our dimension. They use patience and impatience as an example.
Yes, that specific pairing.
Ra says that wherever you find patience within your mind, you must consciously find the corresponding impatience. You have to balance every positive and negative charge with its equal.
Because, according to Ra, the mind contains all things. You cannot banish an aspect of consciousness. You must discover this completeness within yourself. And that requires complete acceptance of these attributes without judgment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because everything we are taught in modern society runs counter to this idea. We are conditioned to believe personal growth is an eradication project.
Absolutely, we want to cut out the bad parts.
Exactly. We think we need to hoard the good traits, like patience and kindness, and wage war against the bad traits, like impatience and anger. But if the mind truly contains all things, how does finding impatience actually create silence?
It seems paradoxical.
It does. I like to compare the mind to a piano keyboard. You know, you have the white keys of patience, but you also have the black keys of impatience.
I like that analogy.
You can't just play the white keys and rip out the black keys, or the instrument is fundamentally broken. Completeness requires all the keys.
And what's crucial is why Ra insists on avoiding judgment. Acceptance isn't about indulging negative habits or acting out poorly.
Right, it's not a license to be mean.
Exactly. It's about neutralizing the internal friction that drains our energy. Judgment creates blockages in the physical consciousness. When you try to rip out the black keys, you are fighting your own nature, and that fight is noisy and exhausting. When you accept the completeness of the mind, you achieve that profound silence, not by forcing a void, but by resolving the conflict.
It reframes inner peace completely. It's not a victory of the good self over the bad self. It's an engineered equilibrium. But Ra doesn't let us just sit alone in a quiet room enjoying our fully tuned piano.
No, they certainly do not.
We have to take this outward. Ra instructs the seeker to turn their gaze outward, applying this exact same framework to the world around them.
Once the internal balance is understood, Ra says you must look at the entities around you and recognize that in each entity there exists completeness.
So it's steps 3 and 4 of the process.
Right. When you view someone else's patience or impatience, you must mirror that understanding in your own mental configuration. You have to see their completeness just as you accepted your own.
And this is where I think a lot of seekers hit a wall. I mean, it is one thing to sit in quiet meditation, breathing deeply, and accepting our own internal flaws.
Oh, absolutely. It's much easier in isolation.
It is a completely different challenge when someone else is being intensely difficult in your daily life. When a colleague is snapping at you in a meeting or someone is being wildly selfish, how do we maintain this balance? How do you see their completeness when your chest is tight and you just want to yell back?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ra provides a really calm, synthesizing answer. Ra asks the seeker to observe the geographical and geometrical relationships between the individual mind, the other mind, the mass mind, and the infinite mind.
The mass mind. That implies a literal structure, like a web we are all plugged into.
That are absolutely plugged into it. What triggers us in others is usually an unaccepted polarity within ourselves. By seeing the mass mind as an interconnected geometry, we realize that the other person's impatience is intimately connected to our own.
So their noise vibrates right through me. I'm triggered because their behavior is highlighting something I haven't balanced in myself.
Precisely. The impatience of the other causes a severe energetic blockage in you, precisely because you are still judging it. By understanding their polarity, you are mapping the geometry of the infinite mind. It removes the illusion of separation. You stop being a victim of their bad mood and become an observer of a polarity playing out in the geographical space between your minds.
That is incredibly liberating. It changes a painful office conflict from a battle of egos into a mirroring exercise. Now, having established this intricate balance of the mind, Ra moves to the second area of learning, the physical body.
Yes, and this is where things get really fascinating.
Ra views the physical body as entirely subservient to the mind. They state very plainly, quote, "The body is a creature of the mind's creation."
It forces a total reevaluation of the physical form. We tend to view our bodies as the foundation of our identity, the primary vehicle. Ra positions the body as entirely subservient, a dense printout of the mind's configuration.
The seeker has to examine how feelings and biases affect various body parts. Just as with the mind, physical polarities must be understood and accepted. And Ra gives this incredibly forward-thinking example.
I do, especially for a session recorded in 1981.
Yeah. Ra states that every biological male is female, and every biological female is male, requiring subtle discernment to grasp these polarity complexes. So what does this all mean?
It challenges our rigid, modern definitions of physical reality.
Hmm.
Ra views biological gender not as an absolute fixed physical point, but as a polarized spectrum of energy that we all carry within us.
Right, so we carry both the male and female energetic polarities regardless of the physical shell we inhabit.
Exactly. The biological bias of the body must be understood, and then the opposite bias must be allowed to find full expression and understanding. Because the body is a creature of the mind, physical ailments might therefore be manifested mental blockages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a chemical and physical repetition of the work done or not done in consciousness.
The body keeps the score of the mind's unresolved polarities. If I'm holding a tight, defensive posture in my shoulders for a decade, it's not just bad ergonomics. It's an unaccepted bias condensing into a physical expression.
Balancing the mind is the absolute prerequisite to balancing the body. The mind must do the work of acceptance first. In fact, Ra considers this foundational work so vital that they deliberately pause the teaching right here.
They don't move on to the third area yet.
No, they delay the third area, the spiritual complex, for a future session due to its deep importance. They want the jumper cables completely clear of resistance before they even talk about connecting to the infinite battery.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But before this session ends, the dialogue takes a really fascinating pivot. We drop from these grand cosmic principles of the infinite mind and biological energy straight down into the hyper-specific, mundane environment of the room they are sitting in.
Jim and Don are managing the physical space, and Don asks a practical question about whether Carla, the instrument, is comfortable.
And Ra's answer is jarringly precise. They say the candle could be rotated clockwise approximately 10 degrees each session to improve the flow of spiraled energy. They also warn that the objects used in the room, the Bible, the incense, the chalice, must be centered with geometric care and never exposed to space or time where work is not of importance.
The specificity often surprises people who read this for the first time.
It genuinely surprised me. I have to push back slightly on behalf of a skeptical listener here. We've just established that the body is a creature created by the mind, and the mind connects to intelligent infinity.
Right.
Why would a sixth density being care about a candle being moved exactly 10 degrees? Is this superstition or is it physics?
This raises an important question. To Ra, the physical environment is an energetic matrix. Precision matters immensely when channeling intelligent infinity.
Sure.
If the mind is geometry, the physical space is an extension of that structure. They're configuring a space to handle massive voltage safely.
Going back to the jumper cables, you don't want frayed wires or a loose connection.
Exactly. It's a profound lesson in reverence. Ra is instructing them to protect a sacred space from the mundane energies of everyday life. If you use a chalice to tune your mind to the infinite, you shouldn't use it for your morning coffee. The outward geometry mirrors the inward geometry. Everything is connected.
It is a physical manifestation of the silence of mind we talked about earlier. The silence of the mind, the balancing of the body's biases, and the geometric care of the physical room. It is all one single unified effort to remove the resistance so that the light can do the working.
Beautifully put.
Thank you. And as we wrap up our deep dive into session 5, we want to leave you with a final provocative contemplation to carry with you. We've explored how the mind contains all things and how the physical body is truly a creature of the mind's creation. As you go about the rest of your day, pay attention to your physical form. What physical tension or blockage are you holding right now that might simply be an unbalanced thought, just waiting for your quiet acceptance?
Thank you for sitting with us. The source text is available at lawphone.info.